Today I decided to give you guys a ranking of these Superman actors. I'm only going to be talking about the ones that are featured in movies, so you're not going to have any Dean Cain, Tom Welling, or Tyler Hoechlin on here. That's not to say those actors do a bad job with the characters. I'm just not really a big fan of Superman in live action TV. I just feel like he's too expensive of a character to do on the small screen. And thus, I have no real interest in watching those shows. I'm sure they do an okay job. I don't hate those shows, they're just not for me. I think when it comes to Superman, if he's not on the big screen, he has to be in animation, otherwise, he's just not really convincing. There are a total of 5 actors on this list, and so without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at last place would have to be Jeff East. I debated even putting him on the list because he is only really the teenage Superman, which is featured towards the beginning of the original Superman movie. But he does have a pretty good amount of screen time. The only downside is he never really gets to suit up, and when you do see him use his powers, it looks kind of goofy. And unfortunately for the actor, all of his lines were dubbed over by Christopher Reeve. There's nothing inherently wrong with his performance, he just doesn't really look like Christopher Reeve. And apart from one interesting scene where he raises the Fortress of Solitude, he doesn't have a whole lot of bearing on the plot. But mind you, this is young pre-Superman, so it leaves a lot to be desired, but he did try his best, and there's nothing really wrong with his performance, it's just nothing really exciting about it either. Up next we have Brandon Routh. Now, Brandon Routh is not a terrible Superman, but he's basically just emulating a Christopher Reeve. That's not really his fault, and I've heard he does a lot better job on the CW shows, which I could believe, but I'm just going by the movies here, and it feels like a second-rate Christopher Reeve impression. Again, I don't blame the actor for this. He actually seems like he's trying his best, and he does look a whole lot like Superman, but, he just basically brings a watered-down version of what we saw in the original Superman film. And it just doesn't quite work. I still do like this movie for what it is, but it does lack in action, and the Superman is a little bit dull. Up next, we're going to have to go with Henry Cavill. Now, Henry Cavill actually does a pretty damn good job as Superman. I know a lot of people had a lot of problems with the way he acts in Man of Steel, such as not saving people enough, and even what some people call aura farming, when he lets a building blow up behind him just to look cool. But I actually think he's a pretty damn good Superman. He looks the part. He's completely jacked. His emotions come across very well, even in the more intense action scenes. The biggest problem, though, is his Clark Kent is next to non-existent. He does exist in these movies. He's pretty lackluster and is pretty boring. He's not overly nerdy. He doesn't really blend in. He's just kind of Henry Cavill with glasses on. He looks like a big, jack, buffed up reporter, and it doesn't really work. It's the one aspect I actually will give Brandon Routh over Henry Cavill is he had a much better Clark Kent, but his Superman was kind of boring. And here it's kind of reversed. A decent Superman, but not such good Clark Kent. And it doesn't really work. When he's playing the real Clark Kent, which is the one he shows to Lois and people who know he's Superman, it's a little more believable, but it leaves something to be desired. A damn good Superman, but not a great Clark. So it had to make it a little lower on this list. Up next, we have the new kid on the block, David Corenswet. Not to be confused with David Cornsweet, that punk ass. David Cornsweet really does bring a really good dynamic to not only Superman, but to Clark Kent as well. He's like a modern day, kind of more hipsterish Superman, listening to punk rock music and being a more of a modern day nerd as opposed to the classical type of nerd that we know Clark Kent as. But it really does work. And I think that he does a really good job at portraying someone who's just shy enough to where you wouldn't really look at him twice as being Superman when he's being Clark. Someone who's believable in a romance with Lois Lane. And of course, a damn good and believable version of Superman that is optimistic, hopeful, and really entertaining. And David Cornsweet really does bring the aspects of Superman to the big screen very well. That's not to say he's perfect. He does come in second place, though, and he's damn good in the role. And I think that he's going to do good going forward in this universe. But coming in number 1 would have to be Christopher Reeve as Superman. Although not the first actor to play Superman, he was the first to play him on the big screen. And he's still the best to this day, almost 50 years removed from the film's initial release. His Clark Kent is bumbling and silly and just not who you would suspect to be Superman. His real-life Clark Kent is compassionate and charming and very suave, and his Superman is spectacular. Even when the movies weren't that great, such as Superman 3 and Superman 4, the best part of those and something that still made it worth watching was Christopher Reeve himself. He really did embody the character, and I'd have to say it's probably the best casting I've ever seen in a superhero film. The only other one that comes even close would be J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. So with the adventure you want, with a charming smile, a great attitude, and a hopeful nature, Christopher Reeve really has it all. And he is the best version of Superman that we've ever had on the big screen. Well, that's my list. I thank you all for watching. There's really not a terrible Superman actor, although I do think that Jeff East did leave a little something to be desired. I still think he was still pretty good as a young Clark Kent. Let me know your favorite Superman actor down below, or just tell me your favorite Superman movie. And peace out.